A traveling nurse, a mysterious note on a doomed flight, and an apology left unspoken. Emily Carter thought she was only running from regret, but she never imagined that the flight would take her back to the place of her deepest pain, and the only place where forgiveness was waiting.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. The airport has a strange kind of silence, the kind that rings out amid 1,000 sounds. The roll of suitcase wheels, the flight announcements, the smell of coffee blending with jet fuel. All of it merging into a steady, monotonous hum. Yet that night at LAX, the silence inside me was louder than all the noise around me. I sat in the waiting area near Gate 57, quietly watching the light reflect off the glossy tile floor. People passed by in a steady stream. Families, businessmen, couples in matching hoodies. All heading toward the place they called home. As for me, I was just heading anywhere that wasn't back. In my hand was my phone, its screen glowing with a photo I shouldn't have opened. My father sitting on the porch of our old house in Chicago, holding a cup of coffee, squinting into the sunlight. That face, both stubborn and gentle, had always confused me. He was the kind of man who didn't know how to say loving words, but quietly cared through small, unspoken acts. When I was young, I hated that. Now I'd give anything to hear him say something. Anything. The memory of our last argument was still vivid, like a burn that hadn't healed. It was raining that night. I'd packed too fast. Dad stood at the door, his shadow long under the yellow light, his voice hoarse with restrained anger. "You think running all over the place will make you feel better, Emily?" I didn't turn around. "At least I'm doing something meaningful. You wouldn't understand." He said something more, about family, about responsibility. But I didn't listen. All I remember clearly is the moment I shouted, "You don't get to control my life anymore." That was the last thing I ever said to him. 6 months have passed, no calls, no messages, just silence. And now, with him lying in a hospital bed after heart surgery, I was sitting in the middle of the night at Los Angeles International Airport, pretending I was fine. I whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. For everything." But the words were swallowed by the dull hum of the air conditioner. No one heard them. Someone dropped a cup of coffee. The dark liquid spread across the floor like a stain. I stared at it too long, maybe because I saw myself in it. Messy, broken, and impossible to clean up. The loudspeaker crackled. "Flight 245 to Chicago, now boarding Group A." I tightened my grip on the bag strap, my heart aching. I wasn't even sure why I'd booked this flight. Maybe guilt. Maybe love. Maybe both. Because sometimes the line between them is paper thin. As I approached the boarding gate, I saw her, the flight attendant. Her name tag read, Samantha. She was tall, her hair neatly tied, her eyes calm yet shadowed by something I couldn't name. She smiled, polite, measured, but tinged with sadness. I didn't know why I noticed her, only that there was something in her gaze that made my chest tighten. As if she could see the exhaustion I was trying to hide. When she handed my ticket back, our eyes met. Only for a few seconds, but long enough for me to sense something. Not fear, exactly, but a warning. "Have a safe flight, Miss Carter," she said softly, her voice low, almost as if she meant something beyond the words. I stepped onto the plane with a strange feeling, part dream, part unease. Inside, warm yellow light glowed. The scent of disinfectant and recycled air filled the cabin. I sat by the window, rested my head against the cold glass, and looked out at the shimmering Los Angeles night. Thousands of lights, thousands of lives. Everyone rushing somewhere. and me, just trying to escape myself. A little girl in the row ahead was playing with a stuffed rabbit, her small voice bright and clear. Her mother, tired but smiling, looked on with gentle patience. Watching them made my chest tighten. My father used to be like that. When I was teased as a kid, he'd say, "Being different means you're brave enough to be yourself." I hadn't believed him then. Now I wished I had. The man beside me had already fallen asleep, his head tilted back, mouth slightly open. The hum of the engines, the soft rustle of passengers, everything blended into a quiet rhythm, so calm it made my heartbeat sound louder. Samantha walked past, her steps light but steady. When she reached my row, she hesitated. Just for a moment, but I felt it. She looked at me, eyes filled with something she couldn't say. Then she smiled and moved on. That strange feeling inside me grew stronger. A vague intuition, like a doctor sensing a patient is hiding something. Not clear, but enough to make me uneasy. The captain's voice came through the speakers. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be taking off shortly. Weather in Chicago is looking good, and flight time will be approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. My father's image returned, sitting quietly at the dinner table, the warm yellow light falling on his graying hair. I imagined calling him right now. What would I say? "Dad, it's me. I'm sorry. I miss you." But even in my mind, the words felt faint, almost unreal. When I opened my eyes, I saw Samantha standing at the front of the cabin, one hand gripping the door handle, eyes fixed outside. Her face was tense. Her fingers clutched the safety card as if trying to calm herself. For a fleeting moment she turned, and our eyes met again. This time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't just fear. It was a plea for help. Something was about to happen. I didn't understand it, but the feeling tightened around my chest like a fist. The plane began to taxi. The runway lights smeared across the glass like tears. I gripped my phone, staring once more at my father's photo. If this were my last flight, I only hoped to say one thing. "I love you, Dad." The engines roared, the plane surged forward, lifting off the ground. And in that moment, I heard his voice in my head. Deep, stern, but warm. "You're always running, Emily. One day you'll realize some things are worth turning back for." I swallowed my tears and stared into the darkness. I didn't know yet that this flight, seemingly ordinary, would change everything. Not because of what I would do, but because someone was about to do something, to save me, and maybe, to save herself. We had just left the ground. The plane trembled lightly, like a long sigh. The hum of the engines blended with the rushing wind outside, pressing against my chest like a weight. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft yellow glow, warm, yet heavy. I leaned my head against the window, watching the dots of Los Angeles shrink, then fade into the sea of night. I still couldn't understand why Samantha's eyes haunted me so much. Maybe because there was something familiar in them. A mix of fear and urgency, as if she knew something I didn't. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was trying to find meaning in everything. A soft ding sounded. The seatbelt sign went off. Some passengers stood up. A few opened their laptops. Some children chattered, asking their mothers when the food would come. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, like any other flight. But my heart kept pounding. Something felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, but unmistakably wrong. Samantha appeared again, this time in the middle of the cabin. She walked slowly, checking each row, her gentle smile still in place, but her eyes unfocused. When she reached my row, I lowered my gaze, pretending to scroll through my phone, but as she stopped beside me, My hand trembled slightly, because she had quietly slipped a small folded note into my palm. No one else saw. It happened in seconds. She kept walking as if nothing had happened. I looked down at the paper in my hand. Small, neatly folded twice. Hesitantly, I opened it. There were only a few lines, hastily written in small, shaky handwriting. Pretend to be sick. Get off the plane. Please. I froze. A chill ran down my spine. I read it again. And again. My palm was slick with sweat. Samantha's voice came from farther down the aisle, calm and even. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our beverage service shortly. As if nothing at all had happened. I looked up. No one was paying attention to me. People were chatting, reading, texting, closing their eyes. Everything inside the cabin looked so perfectly normal, and that normality made the note in my hand feel terrifying. I took a deep breath, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Pretend to be sick? Why? What's going to happen? 1,000 questions crashed through my mind. I was a nurse. I'd seen emergencies before, but never in my life had my instincts screamed like this. Maybe it was a joke, or maybe it wasn't. Another thought slipped in. What if she's trying to save me? I looked back at Samantha. She was standing at the rear of the cabin, speaking softly to an elderly passenger, her smile gentle, calm, not a trace of alarm. If I hadn't known, I would have believed everything was fine, but I did know. Something was happening. I clenched the note in my fist, folded it, and tucked it into my pocket. Fear and regret tangled inside me, squeezing my chest. It wasn't fear of danger itself. It was the fear of not doing something in time, of not living long enough to say I'm sorry to my father, of not healing what was broken. I closed my eyes, picturing his face, kind, weathered, and always carrying something fragile in his gaze. I heard my own voice from memory, sharp, careless. If this was my last moment, would he know I never really wanted to leave? I opened my eyes and swallowed hard. No, I couldn't let it end like this. If Samantha was right, if this was a chance to live, I had to take it. I had to live, not just to live, but to make things right. But what if she was wrong? What if I stood up, caused a scene, and became a laughingstock in front of hundreds of people? Reason and instinct fought inside me. I looked down at my hands, calloused from needles and bandages, hands that had saved others. Now they trembled for my own life. A burst of laughter came from somewhere nearby. A man joked with his little daughter, patting her shoulder. Watching them made my heart ache. Life was still happening all around me, and yet I was trapped in invisible fear. Samantha turned back. As she walked past me, she tilted her head slightly. A quick glance, almost imperceptible, but I knew. She was waiting for me to do something. That look wasn't commanding. It was pleading. I nodded, barely aware I'd done it. Then I did what my heart told me to. I placed a hand on my chest, gasping, leaning toward the aisle. Excuse me, I don't feel well, I said, my voice shaky. The man beside me startled. Hey, someone's not feeling okay. Within seconds, Samantha was there. She didn't ask much. She just placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice calm. You're a nurse, right? I nodded. She looked into my eyes, her tone softened. You need some air. Come with me. She helped me up. My body was trembling. No need to fake it anymore. I was freezing. As we moved past the rows, I felt dozens of curious, anxious eyes following us. We reached the front of the cabin. The doors were still sealed, but Samantha signaled to her colleague, another flight attendant, to notify the captain. Passenger experiencing severe shortness of breath, she said firmly. Everything happened so fast. While waiting for a response, Samantha leaned close, whispering, "You'll be okay, I promise. But you have to trust me." There was something trembling in her eyes, something raw and real. In that instant, I understood. She had lost someone, maybe because they hadn't trusted in time, or hadn't acted fast enough. The captain's voice came through the speakers. "Medical emergency on board. We're returning to the gate." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. I heard complaints, questions, but all I could hear was my heartbeat. Each pulse, a prayer. "Please, let me see my father again. Please." As the plane turned back, Samantha kept her hand on my shoulder. Warm, steady, reassuring. Not the warmth of duty, but of compassion. I didn't know what awaited us, but I believed her. Because sometimes reason doesn't matter. Only a fragile thread of faith does. Outside the window, the airport lights reappeared, glowing closer. I didn't yet know that this small decision, to pretend, to rise from that seat, would draw the line between life and death, between regret and forgiveness. And as the plane touched down again, I knew. My life had just turned onto a different path. Forever. As the plane's wheels touched the runway, my whole body trembled. I tried to stay calm, though my heart kept pounding wildly, as if it wanted to break free from my chest. The air inside the cabin was unnaturally still, a silence so taut it felt ready to snap. Samantha sat beside me in the front row, her eyes fixed on the cockpit door, waiting for a signal from the crew. I could see her fingers tightening slightly, though her face remained composed. "You'll be okay," she whispered. Her voice was soft as a breath, but something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. I nodded faintly, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I didn't dare ask. Maybe because I was afraid to know the answer. Outside, the runway lights blinked. From afar, an ambulance siren wailed, cutting through the fading hum of the engines. The remaining passengers began murmuring. Some even pulled out their phones to record. Someone whispered, "Probably a heart attack." Another replied, "Hope it's nothing serious." No one knew that the feeling of the paper still lingered in my palm, cold, rough, as if pressed into my skin. When the cabin door opened, cold air rushed in. An airport staff member stepped forward, voice steady and firm. "We've got medical assistance here." Samantha gave a small nod, helping me to my feet. "Careful," she said, her hand resting gently on my back, warm, yet faintly trembling. We stepped out without anyone stopping us. I could feel the eyes of hundreds of passengers following us, curious, pitying, relieved that it wasn't them being led away. We had barely crossed the jet bridge when Samantha stopped. She glanced behind us to make sure no one could hear, then leaned in close, whispering almost against my ear, "Don't go back. No matter what happens, don't return to that plane." I stared at her, my throat tightening. "What's going on?" She shook her head, eyes heavy. "I can't tell you. But trust me, you did the right thing." Then she turned and left, disappearing into the cabin as swiftly as she'd come, leaving me with the medical staff. They led me to a nearby waiting room, harsh white lights reflecting off sterile walls. A female staff member asked, "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, just a bit lightheaded." She nodded, handing me a cup of water. I took a sip, but it caught in my throat. In the mirror on the wall, I saw my reflection. Pale skin, wide eyes, confusion written all over my face. I realized I could no longer tell the difference between fear and survival instinct. I sat there, listening to the ticking clock. 5 minutes, 10, then 20. No one said a word. No one told me to return to the plane. And then, through the glass, I saw airport security arriving. No commotion, no sirens. They just moved. Calm, deliberate, precise. I stood abruptly, What's happening? I asked the attendant. She looked puzzled. I'm not sure. They just said they need to check something on board. My heart sank. Through the thick glass, I saw uniformed figures stepping into the jet bridge that led to the plane I had just left. The cabin door was still sealed, the red light glowing outside. A chill ran down my spine. If I hadn't left, what would have happened? I sank into the chair, gripping the cup so tightly the rim bent. Cold sweat trickled down my neck. My whole body felt drained of strength. I didn't know what was happening inside, but every second felt endless. I could only hear my heartbeat and the steady tick of the clock. Then a voice crackled from a staff member's radio. Passenger has been subdued. No injuries. The short message sliced through the room. I held my breath. Which passenger? The attendant glanced at me, confused. I turned away, tears welling up for no reason I could name. Fear, relief, maybe both. I wondered if I had still been sitting there in that same seat. Would I still be breathing, sitting here in safety now? Outside, the flashing lights reflected on the window, scattering like fragments of fading memories. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, staring at the plane, the one I'd thought I would leave on. And now, I didn't want to leave anymore. Not because of fear, but because I knew. None of this had been coincidence. Samantha knew. She had saved me. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up. A message from my sister. Did you land yet? Dad's still asleep. The doctor says he might wake up in the morning. Tears filled my eyes. I typed back with shaking fingers. I'm still at the airport. Something happened. But I'm okay. Tell Dad I'll be home soon. I paused for a moment, then added, and tell him, I'm sorry. When I hit send, it felt like something inside me finally loosened. Not fully, but enough. Moments later, the door opened. Samantha stepped in. She no longer looked like the composed, distant flight attendant. Her hair had come loose, her eyes tired but soft as they met mine. Are you okay? I nodded, unable to speak. What happened? She shook her head slowly. Someone tried to cause trouble. Not a bomb, not terrorism, but dangerous enough that someone could have died. I noticed something off about him when he boarded. I stayed silent. Why me? I asked finally, voice trembling. She gave a faint, sorrowful smile. I didn't choose you. I just saw something in your eyes, something I didn't want to lose. Her words caught in my throat. In that cold, fluorescent-lit airport, two strangers sat facing each other. No need for explanations, no need for names or pasts. We both understood we were living through the same thing, regret. Outside, the Los Angeles sky was pitch black, yet somehow I saw light. Faint, thread-thin, but real. I exhaled softly. Thank you. For saving me. Samantha smiled, her eyes shimmering. No, Emily. Maybe you were the one who saved me. She left soon after, leaving me alone. The air was still heavy, but my heart was lighter. I don't know how long I sat there, only that when the airport lights dimmed, I was still staring out the window, watching as the plane was slowly towed away. Maybe it's only when we truly face fear that we understand how deeply we want to live. And to live, really live, isn't just to breathe, but to be forgiven, to love, and to find our way home. After everything, I was still sitting in the airport waiting area, where the cold white lights covered everything like a layer of artificial mist. The world kept moving. People lined up at security checkpoints, laughing, talking, rushing to their gates. And I felt as though I had just stepped out of a distorted dream hovering between life and death. Inside me, fear still lingered, but it had mixed with something else, a faint sense of gratitude, as if the universe had whispered that I still had time. Time to speak, to love, to say I'm sorry. I could still remember the moment Samantha looked at me through the glass. That gaze. I'd never forgotten it. It wasn't the look of someone simply doing her job. It was the look of someone carrying an unhealed wound. Someone who knew what it meant to lose a person before saying the final words. They asked me to rest while the police and security continued their work elsewhere. I tried to stay calm, but my hands still trembled around the coffee cup. The hot liquid did nothing to warm my cold fingers. Every time I took a sip, bitterness spread across my tongue. And I couldn't tell whether it came from the coffee or from my own heart. A shadow approached. Samantha. She was still in her flight attendant uniform, though her jacket was off. The fabric at her shoulders slightly wrinkled, a few strands of hair loose. Under the sterile white light, she looked exhausted. But her eyes remained steady. As she came closer, I could hear her slow, deliberate footsteps, as if each one carried the weight of what had just happened. "Are you all right?" Her voice was soft, but carried warmth. I nodded. "All right. If all right means still trying to believe this isn't a dream." Samantha smiled faintly. "No, it's not a dream. You just got out of a very bad situation." I looked at her, my eyes filled with both doubt and gratitude. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. I noticed him the moment he boarded. There was something in his eyes. Off. I once met someone like that years ago, and I did nothing. This time, I couldn't let it happen again. Her voice cracked at the end, each word carrying an old scar. I stayed silent. Something stirred inside me. Not just gratitude, but recognition. I had watched patients die because I arrived a few minutes too late. I knew what it was like to carry regret like a shadow that never leaves. I asked quietly, "That person you met, what happened?" Samantha sat beside me, her hands clasped together, eyes staring into the distance. 7 years ago, I was working a flight to Dallas. There was a young woman seated near the emergency exit, trembling the whole way. I thought she was just afraid of flying, but when we landed, she took her own life. I was the last person to see her alive, and I did nothing. Her voice broke. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but when I saw you, tonight, with those same hollow eyes, that same quiet pain, I knew that if I stayed silent again, I'd never forgive myself. The room fell utterly silent. Only the soft hum of the air conditioner and the pounding of my heart remained. I whispered, "So you saved me." She shook her head gently. "No, Emily. I just tried to save a piece of my own soul." I let out a shaky laugh, half a sob. "That's strange. You saved me to save yourself. And I survived, to make amends with my father." Samantha looked up, her eyes glistening, and then we both laughed. A small, fragile laugh, but real. The kind of laugh that escapes from two lost souls who, somehow, found each other amid the noise of the world. She said, "Maybe we're both learning to forgive, not others, but ourselves." I nodded, tears rolling down my cheeks before I could wipe them away. After a while, Samantha stood to leave. She had to return to assist with the investigation. Before she went, she placed a hand on my shoulder, her gaze deep and impossibly tender. "I once lost someone I never got to say goodbye to. Don't let that happen to you." Her words pierced my chest, not painfully, but sharply enough to wake something in me. When she left, I stared at my hand, feeling the warmth she left behind. Real, grounding, powerful. I opened my phone and looked at my father's photo again. His faint smile, his calm face. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I felt something close to faith. The belief that there was still time. I started to type a message but stopped. No, not a message. I would say it. I wanted to hear his voice. To hear him breathe, to hear him scold me for coming home late, to hear the simple words I once took for granted. I lifted my head and took a deep breath. The air still smelled of metal and disinfectant, but somehow I felt lighter. In the distance, Samantha turned once more before walking through the security doors. She didn't speak, just gave a small nod. A quiet understanding. Between us, no thanks were needed, because we both knew sometimes a single glance is enough to save a soul. I stayed for a long while. The terminal slowly emptied. The loudspeakers continued to announce new departures. Life carried on. But for me, everything had changed. Gratitude bloomed quietly inside me, not just for Samantha, but for that single moment when I finally understood the value of life and how fragile it truly is. I thought of my father, my sister, the old house with its morning coffee scent and the creak of wooden chairs. I whispered, "Dad, I'm coming home. This time I won't miss it." A tear fell onto my hand, not one of fear or pain, but of hope. Outside the window, dawn was coming slowly. The first light spread across the night sky, still veiled in mist, soft and thin as a breath. I watched it, feeling as though that light was stitching back the torn parts of my heart. Gently, bit by bit. And in the stillness of early morning, I realized sometimes salvation doesn't come from miracles, but from a person. Someone brave enough to look into your pain and say, "I understand." Morning at LAX had a strange kind of light, clear and gentle, yet hollow in a way that made you feel small. The sun was rising beyond the glass, cutting through a thin veil of mist, bathing the terminal in pale gold, as if the world itself were being washed clean after last night's nightmare. But for me, that nightmare hadn't left my body. It clung to my every breath, to every heartbeat. Each time I closed my eyes, I still saw Samantha's eyes, and that small piece of paper with its trembling words, "Pretend to be sick. Get off the plane. Please." I had done as she asked, without understanding why, only because of a raw, instinctive feeling, and that one decision had kept me alive. Now, thinking back, I shivered. Standing on the edge between logic and instinct, I had chosen to trust fear. But perhaps, sometimes fear itself is a way of loving your own life. I sat in a small cafe tucked in a corner of the terminal, my hands trembling around a cup of latte. The thin curl of steam brushed my skin but couldn't chase away the chill inside me. Around me, the world kept moving. The roll of luggage wheels, the airport announcements, the laughter of children. But inside, my world had cracked open and rearranged itself. I unlocked my phone and saw a message from my sister. "Dad's awake. He asked about you." I read it again and again, my chest tightening. My fingers shook as I pressed call. My sister's voice came through, hoarse with exhaustion. "Hey, he's doing better now. He's weak, but he's awake. He said, he misses you." I bit my lip, trying to keep my sobs in. She added softly, "He said, that stubborn girl. But I know she loves her dad." I broke. The tears came fast, sudden, like a storm breaking through a dam. I covered my mouth as they poured out. My sister's voice turned gentle. "You're still in LA, right? Come home, Emily. He'll be so happy." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Yeah, I'm coming." When the call ended, I sat for a long time, feeling something inside me melt, light and painful, like ice breaking apart after too many months of winter. Then I looked up, and there she was, Samantha. Still in her airline uniform, jacket off, a few strands of hair loose around her face. She looked tired under the pale lights, but her eyes were steady. She was talking to someone, then turned, and our eyes met. Across the stream of passengers and luggage, I felt an invisible thread tighten between us. Two strangers bound by a single, wordless understanding. I stood and walked toward her. When I got close, she smiled faintly. "I guess you didn't board another flight yet." I shook my head. "I wasn't ready." She nodded, not rushing to comfort me, not pretending. Just looked at me as though she already understood. "I needed to see you," Samantha said quietly, "to make sure you're not just surviving, but actually living." The word struck something deep inside me. Living for real. How long had it been since I last did that? We sat together in silence. The air between us was still, yet full of something that didn't need to be spoken. "I've seen too many people alive but not really living," Samantha said, her eyes distant. "They walk, they work, they breathe, but something inside them has already died. I used to be one of them." I asked softly. "You lost someone, didn't you?" Samantha gave a small, sad smile. "A friend. She was a flight attendant too. We were flying from Seattle to Denver. She told me she felt uneasy, afraid. I brushed it off. Told her she was overthinking. Later that flight had a pressure failure. When I reached her seat, she wasn't breathing anymore. I've never forgotten that feeling, knowing that if I'd just paid a little more attention, things might have been different." She paused, staring down at her hands. Her voice trembled. "Last night when I saw you, I saw the same eyes, the same quiet pain. I couldn't let it happen again." I couldn't speak. Her story felt like a mirror held up to mine, both of us trapped in regret, hiding behind our own masks of strength while slowly decaying inside. I finally asked, "So, if I hadn't listened last night?" Samantha looked me straight in the eye. "Then by now, you'd probably be a name on the morning news." A chill ran down my spine. I shuddered. "You saved me." She shook her head gently. "No, Emily. I just reminded you that life is still worth keeping." We sat there sharing a silence that was long but not heavy. The quiet of two souls who had just weathered a storm and now sat in its calm, learning to believe in second chances. At last I whispered, "How do I start over?" Samantha smiled, a small, peaceful smile that steadied me. "Start by calling the person you love most," she said, "and tell them what you've never had the courage to say." I took out my phone, my hands trembling as I typed, "Dad, I'm coming home. I love you." Send. Just a tiny motion, but in that moment I knew I had done something I hadn't dared to do in 6 months. When I looked up, my eyes were wet. Samantha was still sitting beside me, watching quietly. When she saw me smile through the tears, she said softly, "See? Sometimes, a single message can change an entire life." The announcement came over the speakers. "Passengers on Flight 458 to Chicago, please proceed to boarding." I stood. The fear from last night still lingered somewhere deep inside, but this time, I didn't let it guide me. I gripped my bag strap, took a deep breath, and started walking toward the gate. Samantha walked with me part way. When we reached the junction, she stopped. "Do you know why I chose you?" she asked. I looked at her. "Why?" She replied, "Because in your eyes I saw what I once had, a fear born from love, and only those who still fear because they love can be saved." I couldn't find words. I simply took her hand, and she held mine in return. A long, steady grip, as if we were trading something wordless. Faith, courage, forgiveness. I walked on, turning back once. Samantha was still there, small against the bright morning light, her eyes calm, watching me go. I knew that image would stay with me forever. When the plane lifted off, I looked through the window. Below, Los Angeles grew smaller and smaller. The sky ahead stretched wide and blue. I felt something inside me open with it. No longer afraid, no longer running. In my heart, a voice spoke, soft and familiar. Dad, I'm coming home. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. This time, tears of gratitude. The tears of someone who had finally found a reason to live, to love, and to return. I can't remember how long I'd been sitting in that airplane cabin before it landed. Everything felt wrapped in fog. The engine's hum was so soft it made my heartbeat stumble, and my mind sank into a strange kind of stillness. Not peace, but the emptiness that follows panic. The sky outside was a pale gray, the clouds thick and heavy against the window. I kept staring out, tracing the faint lights of other planes in the distance. For a moment, I wondered if the people on those flights knew how much of their lives they were really living, or if they were just drifting through it. The young man beside me, a college student maybe, had his headphones in, eyes closed, calm. I envied that calmness. For him, this was just another flight. For me, it was the aftershock of a nightmare I still hadn't fully woken from. I kept my seatbelt fastened, even though the light had gone off. Inside my chest, my heart still refused to believe it was safe. Unease lingered, hiding somewhere between breaths. Every time I closed my eyes, Samantha appeared. Her eyes, her trembling hand passing me that note, her urgent whisper, "Pretend to be sick. Please." I still didn't know how she'd sensed danger, but I had trusted her. Completely. And now I understood. That trust had saved my life. When the plane's wheels finally touched down in Chicago, I could hardly breathe. My body tensed all over. Only when the soft ding sounded, the signal to unfasten seatbelts, did I take a deep breath. Around me, people stretched, chatted, laughed, as if the world had never gone wrong. I stayed seated. My heart felt as though it were trying to slow itself down, to match the pace of a normal life that had nearly been stolen away. As I stepped off the plane, a cold gust swept in. Chicago was the same as ever. The metallic, snowy air, damp and bone-deep cold. I stopped on the jet bridge and looked out the window. In the distance, police cars were scattered across the tarmac. My heart jolted. A shiver of recognition ran through me. I grabbed my phone. A message from my sister flashed on the screen. There's something on the news about an incident at LAX. They said it was your flight." My hands trembled as I opened the attached video. The screen showed airport police escorting a man away. Dark jacket, head down, wrists cuffed. The news ticker below read, "Security incident at LAX. Passenger armed with a weapon detained before takeoff. Crew acted swiftly. No injuries reported." I froze in the middle of the terminal. All the sounds around me, footsteps, voices, announcements, vanished. I could only hear my heartbeat, wild and uneven, tangled with fear and gratitude. If Samantha hadn't spoken to me, if I hadn't trusted her, if I'd just stayed in my seat waiting for takeoff, just one moment's difference, and I might not be here at all. My throat closed. My vision blurred. I grabbed a nearby handrail to steady myself. People passing by probably thought I was just tired from the flight. No one knew I had just glimpsed the narrow edge between my life and its end. I sank into an empty chair, phone still in my hand. The news kept playing, the reporter praising the quick response of the flight crew. I listened, my heart tightening. They didn't mention Samantha. No one knew her name. No one spoke of the woman who had quietly risked herself to save a stranger. I opened my email and began to type. To the flight attendant named Samantha. Thank you for saving me, and perhaps saving everyone on that flight. My name is Emily Carter. Please know I will never forget. I sent it to the airline's customer service address, unsure if anyone would ever read it. But when I hit send, something inside me finally eased, lightened for real. On the ride out of the airport, I called my sister. I'm on my way. How's Dad? Her voice wavered. He's waiting for you. He's weak, but he keeps asking, has Emily come home yet? Please hurry. I nodded, though she couldn't see. I will. I'm coming now. Outside, Chicago lay under a heavy sky. The clouds were thick and gray, but somehow it all looked beautiful. The cars gliding through wet streets, the lights reflecting off puddles. It felt like the whole city was breathing slowly. I leaned against the taxi window, watching the bare trees slide by. This was home, the place I'd once wanted to escape. Now it was the only place I wanted to be. I remembered winter mornings when Dad would sit in the kitchen, brewing coffee, mumbling something I never cared to listen to. I remembered the last look he gave me, anger mixed with sorrow, and the sound of the door closing behind me, the sound that ended our argument and sealed off a piece of my heart. Now those memories returned, but they weren't sharp anymore. They were softer, warmer, as if pain itself had thawed into forgiveness. When the taxi turned onto my old street, the first snow of the season began to fall. Light flakes drifting slowly, melting as they touched the glass. I reached out and let one land on my hand, feeling the cold seep into my skin. Vivid, real, alive, like I'd just come back from another world. The car stopped in front of our old house. The paint still peeled. The door still creaked the way it did when I left. But now, instead of feeling foreign, it felt like it was waiting. Open, patient. I didn't get out right away. For a few seconds, I sat still, one hand pressed to my chest, feeling my heartbeat. Strong, steady, alive. I whispered, almost to myself, I'm still here, and I'm not going to waste it. Then I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wood and smoke. I took a deep breath and stepped up the porch steps. Each step felt like it was erasing a fragment of my old guilt. As my fingers touched the doorknob, I thought of Samantha, the woman who had trusted me. With her warning, with her eyes, I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Thank you. I hope you're safe too." The sounds around me faded. Only the wind, my heartbeat, and my breath remained. And I understood. The greatest crisis in life isn't the moment we almost die. It's when we live without knowing why. I had survived a quiet kind of disaster. No explosions, no blood, but it had been enough to wake me up. Now, only one fear remained, the fear of staying silent when love needs to be spoken. I smiled and knocked on the door. A moment passed, then it opened. Warm light spilled out into the cold, and I knew my journey home had truly begun. The cabin had fallen completely silent when the police arrived. No one screamed, no one spoke. Only the pale reflections of the overhead lights on faces full of confusion. Everything unfolded in a terrifying kind of quiet. A passenger was led away, disappearing down the aisle toward the back. I only saw his back, and a cold shiver ran down mine. The plane never took off. The cabin door opened, letting in a draft of freezing air. The crew moved efficiently, calmly, so professional that anyone watching might have thought it was just a minor technical issue. But I knew better. I could feel the tension in every motion, see it in their eyes. And more than anyone, I knew I had just escaped something terrible. My hands trembled. Sweat chilled on my forehead. The man beside me leaned over and whispered, "Are you all right?" I nodded, forcing a smile, though my lips barely moved. "I think so," was all I could manage. A security officer walked down the aisle and murmured something to Samantha. She gave a small nod, then turned toward me. Our eyes met for just a moment, enough for me to know it was over. She approached quietly, her voice soft as breath. "Ms. Carter, would you come with me for a moment?" I stood, my legs unsteady, light as air. She guided me gently out of the row, her hand warm and firm against my arm. For a moment, I felt like a patient being led out of delirium. And Samantha, she was the one guiding me back into consciousness. As we stepped into the jet bridge, the air turned cold and still. So still I could hear my own heartbeat. Light from the runway filtered through the windows, fractured and thin like streaks of water. "Are you okay?" Samantha asked. I nodded, my voice shaky. I don't know. It feels like I just woke up from a dream." She placed a hand on my arm. "To be honest, I'm shaking too." I looked at her, the woman who had just saved an entire flight, and saw her hand trembling. For the first time, I understood. Fear spares no one, not even the brave. We stopped halfway down the jet bridge. The only light came from the white glow reflecting off the metal floor. She leaned against the railing, exhaled slowly, as if shedding the weight of the world. "I noticed him from the start," she said quietly. There was something in his eyes. Off. I'd seen that look before, in a friend of mine, right before she did something she couldn't take back. That time, I stayed silent, and I lost her. I swore I wouldn't let it happen again. I stared at her, my throat tight. "You saved me," I whispered. She shook her head. "No, Emily, you saved yourself. I just gave you the warning I once wished someone had given me." A cold breeze drifted through, lifting a strand of my hair. We stood there a long time, two strangers, fragile yet connected by something invisible, something wordless. "You have someone waiting for you, don't you?" Samantha asked. I nodded. "My father. We fought before he got sick. I told myself I wouldn't go back. But I swallowed hard, tears blurring my vision. Now all I want is to tell him I love him." Samantha smiled softly. "Then live, Emily. Don't live to be afraid, live to love. That's the only reason that matters." I reached for her hand. "Thank you." She held mine in return. Her hand was small, trembling slightly, but it radiated a quiet strength that steadied me. In that cold night, no words were needed, just the knowledge of another heartbeat beside my own. A voice called from the other end of the bridge. "Flight Attendant Harper, we need you for a moment." Samantha nodded, then turned back to me. "You should rebook another flight. The police will need to check everything, but you'll be okay." "I'll live," I said. "Not just for me, for my father, for the people I love, and for you." Her gaze softened. "That's enough." She turned and walked away, her small, steady figure framed by the white light. When she reached the cabin door, she paused and looked back at me. She didn't speak, just placed a hand over her heart. I understood. It was goodbye. It was her way of saying, "Thank you too." I mirrored the gesture, pressing my palm to my chest. We stood like that, silent, connected by something beyond words. Back in the terminal, everything felt strangely calm. People were still chatting, complaining about the delay. No one knew they'd just escaped disaster. I looked around, feeling as if I existed slightly outside the world, a world where miracles happened quietly, unseen. I sat down by the window. Outside, the plane was being towed slowly away from the gate. The red light on its tail blinked rhythmically, like the steady pulse of a heart newly revived. I opened my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed. "To Flight Attendant Samantha Harper. Thank you for saving me, for teaching me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. I won't forget." I hit send. Message sent. Just that. And tears came again. I didn't know where Samantha was now. Maybe in a small room giving her statement. Maybe filling out paperwork. But I was certain she felt something. Somewhere. Maybe the same quiet relief. The same fragile peace. Maybe she, too, was looking out at the runway and smiling. I leaned my head against the window. The glass was cold, but warmth bloomed in my chest. The yellow light shimmered through the mist, turning the darkness soft. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. In that breath, I could hear life, thin, trembling, but strong. I thought of my father, my sister, the people who had crossed my path, and for the first time in years, I felt true gratitude. Samantha had once told me, "You don't have to be strong all the time, just be honest." Now I understood. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the doorway through which we reach one another. The space where we learn to love ourselves too. When I opened my eyes, snow had begun to fall outside, slow, delicate flakes dissolving as they touched the runway. Each one was a moment, fragile and fleeting, balanced between fear and faith. I smiled softly, alive, loving, still in time to return. I rose, walking through the crowd of passengers still absorbed in their own small worlds. No one noticed the woman passing quietly among them. A woman carrying a night's worth of tears, terror, and gratitude. And as I stepped through the gate's bright doorway, I heard Samantha's voice again in my mind. When courage isn't enough for words, just reach for someone's hand. That's all it takes. I placed my hand over my heart, feeling its rhythm, steady, warm, and more alive than ever. The first light of morning streamed across the cafe window at the airport where I sat. Outside, snow was falling softly, each flake like a pale fragment of memory, descending quietly and dissolving into the cold, damp pavement. I cupped my hands around a warm mug of coffee. The sting of the wind mixed with the smell of roasted beans made everything feel achingly real. Just a few hours ago, I'd believed I was going to die. And yet now, I was breathing, drinking coffee, watching strangers hurry past. I'm alive. 2 simple words, yet they rang in my head like a sacred prayer. My phone buzzed gently. A new message from my sister lit up the screen. "Dad's awake? He's weak, but he keeps asking, 'Where's Emily? Call us.'" The moment I read it, tears came without warning. Relief, regret, love. Everything swelled and tangled in my chest. I took a long, shaky breath to steady my heart, then dialed my sister's number. Her voice trembled when she answered. Dad's lying here. He can hear you." A pause. Then I heard it. My father's faint, uneven breathing. "Dad," my voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have let anger bury love. I'm so sorry." A weak sigh came through the line. Then his voice. Thin, frail, but still warm. Still his. "My girl, just come home. I only need to know you're safe." I broke down. In the middle of the airport crowd, I covered my face and sobbed. Not from fear this time, but from gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance to love, to be forgiven, to still be here to say what should have been said long ago. I didn't wait for another flight. I rented a car and left the airport that same morning. The road out of Chicago was white with snow. The wind hit the windshield, and each flake burst apart like tiny sparks of silver. I drove slowly, blinking away tears that blurred the view. The radio played a wordless piano piece. Its quiet notes wove through the sound of wind, filling the hollow spaces inside me. I thought of Samantha. I wondered where she was. Maybe in a crew restroom, maybe answering questions about the night before. I hoped she was okay. I hoped she was resting finally, with the peace both of us had been missing for too many nights. I opened my email app and began to type. Subject: Thank you, dear Samantha. Thank you for saving me. Not only with what you did, but with what you believed. Last night when you looked at me and said, "Don't let yourself regret this," I understood. Some wounds don't come from fear, but from words left unsaid. I'm on my way home now, to finally say them. Thank you for giving me that chance. Emily, I hit send, then leaned back in my seat. The endless white road ahead looked like a blank page waiting to be written on. By the time I reached home, the sun hung high overhead. The porch roof was blanketed in snow. The curtains in the front window had faded with age, and the wind chime by the door sang the same soft notes I remembered. Everything looked the same, but my heart wasn't. Sarah opened the door. Her face was tired, but her eyes brightened when she saw me. "You're home," she whispered, then pulled me into a hug. "Dad's been asking for you. If you'd come any later." I didn't let her finish. I just held her tight. The smell of wool and tears blended between us. "I'm here," I said. "I'm really here." She led me inside. The air smelled of medicine, ginger tea, and old wood, a scent I both feared and loved. The bedroom door creaked open. Dad lay on the bed, his face thinner but his eyes still clear. When I stepped closer, he turned his head slightly, as if afraid I might vanish. "My girl," he murmured. "I thought you weren't coming back." I knelt beside him and took his hand, bony, cold, but gripping mine with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I went too far. I chose silence over love." He smiled weakly, and I held on too tight instead of trusting you'd return. "But see, you're here now." I bowed my head into his palm, feeling the rough, familiar warmth. Tears spilled freely. There was no more fear, no more guilt, only the soft, forgiving touch of being home again. We stayed like that for a long while. No words were needed. After everything, silence itself became the most beautiful language we'd ever shared. Afternoon light filtered into the room, painting it gold. I sat by his bedside, watching snow drift past the window. Then my phone buzzed. A new email. From Samantha Harper. "Hi, Emily. I just finished my shift. I cried when I read your message. Last night, when I wrote that note, I thought I might get fired. Or worse. But when I saw your eyes, I knew I had to act. I used to think courage meant not being afraid. Now I know courage is being afraid and acting anyway. Thank you for believing me. And if you ever come back to Los Angeles, let me buy you a coffee. Not in crisis, but in peace." I read it again and again. Each line beat like a distant heart, steady and familiar. And then I smiled. A true smile this time, free and unforced. I stepped out onto the porch. The cold air stung my skin, but I didn't flinch. I breathed in deeply. A full, clean breath. For the first time in months, the air no longer tasted of regret, but of gratitude. The snow had slowed. Pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, lighting the quiet little street. I tilted my face upward, eyes closed, and whispered, "Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for believing in a stranger. And thank you, life, for giving me one more chance." When I turned back inside, my father was asleep. His face was peaceful, lips curved in a faint smile. I knew he was dreaming of summers long past, of laughter, sunlight, and home. I sat beside him, took his hand again, and said softly, "Dad, I'm here. I'm not leaving anymore." Then I breathed. Deep, deliberate breaths. Inhale, gratitude. Exhale, forgiveness. Each breath, each heartbeat was proof that I was alive, that I had chosen to return. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood. Gratitude isn't what comes after life becomes good. It's what makes life good. There, in that old house, amid winter winds and falling snow, I smiled. A smile that, for the first time, belonged wholly to peace. The first days in Chicago passed like a slow dream. No engine noise, no pressure from back-to-back shifts or flights. Only the wind hissing past the eaves, the soft crackle of melting snow, and the steady tick of the wall clock in the old kitchen. Every small sound suddenly became part of a healing music I never knew I needed so much. I woke earlier than everyone else. Dim light slipped through the curtains, spreading across the honey-colored wooden floor. I boiled water. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, mingling with the warm scent of wood and the ginger tea my father likes. From the next room came a light cough, then silence. I went in and adjusted his blanket. He opened his eyes and looked at me. Deep, tired, but gentle. "You're up so early," he said softly. "I'm used to it. At work, I'd already be on my way to the hospital by now." He smiled, his thin hand resting on mine. "You work too much, Emily. I know you love your job, but loving yourself is part of the job too." I smiled. "I'm learning that, Dad." And I really was learning. Learning how to stop, how to breathe, how not to run from the quiet. For years, I lived like a migratory bird, always flying off before my feelings could take root. But now, in this house, in the warmth of family, I felt my heart begin to slow. Not from exhaustion, but because it was finally resting. At noon, I went out onto the porch. Snow still clung to the steps, but the first sunlight of spring was touching down. On the bare branches, a few pale green buds had just cracked open. I held out my hand to catch a drop of water falling from the eaves, cold, but as pure as a message. Everything can begin again. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. A new email. I opened it. Sender: Samantha Harper. "Hi, Emily. I don't know if I should write this, but this morning when I looked out over the runway, I thought of you. After what happened that night, I took a few weeks off. I think I need to learn to believe that the past no longer has the right to define me. I've lived too long with the fear that if I make one more mistake, I'll ruin everything. But really, sometimes the only thing we need to do is keep living and allow ourselves to be at peace. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world. If you ever come back to LA, let me buy you a cup of coffee. Not in the middle of a panic, but at daybreak." I read it over and over, my throat tightening. Every word seemed to touch the deepest part of me, the place I'd kept silent for so many years. I leaned against the porch post and watched the pale gray sky slowly brighten. I wrote back, "Samantha, I understand what you mean. I'm learning to trust again too, in others and in myself. I used to think healing meant forgetting, but it doesn't. Healing is when you can dare to remember and it doesn't hurt anymore. I don't know when I'll return to LA, but when I do, I'll find you. Thank you for saving me and for teaching me to look at life with new eyes." I hit send, then sat and watched the snow melt into water, running down the steps like time slipping through my fingers. In the afternoon, Dad woke and called me out to the garden. "Gimme a hand," he said with a tired smile. Together, we cleaned up the old pots Mom used to plant. The soil was hard and cold, but when I dug deeper, a soft, damp, fragrant layer appeared. Dad said, "When the snow melts, the earth can breathe again. People are the same." I paused and looked at him. "You're breathing again too, aren't you?" He chuckled and nodded. "Thanks to you." We didn't say anything more. We simply replanted a few new mint cuttings in silence. The scent of mint drifted through the air, crisp and cool. I thought, maybe this is what healing really is, not erasing the past, but planting something better in the same ground. That night, after Dad fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, the warm lamplight spilling across the wooden floor. I opened the notebook I carry on all my trips. The first pages were full of medical notes, medication lists, visiting hours. But at the back were a few pages I'd written for myself on lonely nights in unfamiliar cities. What am I running from? Who am I trying to save, the patient or myself? Reading those lines, my heart ached, then softened. I picked up my pen and added, Maybe you've saved someone already, Emily. Yourself. And you don't have to run anymore. I closed the notebook, feeling lighter. Outside, the wind rustled the curtains, carrying the scent of damp grass and ginger tea from the kitchen. I opened my phone and scrolled through old photos. There was one I'd taken at LAX. Only the sky and a line of runway lights. But this time, when I looked at it, I didn't see the weariness of departures. I saw the promise of returns. The next morning, I went to the nearby supermarket with my sister Sarah. She drove and chatted about small plans, repainting the house, planting more lavender by the porch. Her voice was steady, warm. I looked at her and suddenly realized, for years, she had been the quiet thread keeping me tied to this world. I touched her hand lightly and said, "Thank you for always being here." She smiled without asking why. "Of course, Emily. Just promise you won't disappear again." I laughed and nodded. "I promise." On the way back, the snowfall stopped. Sunlight flashed across car windows like crystal. I rolled mine down and let the wind rush against my face. It was cold, but pleasant, as if every cell in me were waking up. That evening, after Dad had gone to bed, I returned to the porch. The moon hovered overhead, its light glinting off the remaining patches of snow in a pale silver sheet. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air was biting cold, but it felt good. I remembered the moment on the plane. The small note, Samantha's eyes, the grip of her hand. I remembered the fear of not knowing whether I would ever see another sunrise. And then, I remembered the moment the plane stopped, when I understood I'd been given a second chance. Now, I was living inside that chance. I didn't need to look for anything grand. Just this, a quiet evening, moonlight on snow, slow and peaceful breaths. I thought that maybe healing isn't a destination, but a journey, where we learn to live more lightly, forgive more freely, and love without conditions. I opened my notebook and wrote the day's final line. My priorities are no longer schedules or work. They are love, gratitude, and peace in every breath. I set down the pen and smiled. In that moment, I heard my own voice clearly. No longer the ragged breathing of someone running away, but the steady rhythm of someone who has stepped out of the storm. I lifted my eyes to the sky. The clouds were thinning, revealing a faint band of stars in the distance. The light wasn't brilliant, but it was enough to guide a traveler. And I knew I had found my own way. That morning, sunlight streamed gently through my bedroom window, soft, golden, impossibly tender. I woke to the sound of life itself. The kettle whistling in the kitchen, sparrows chirping outside the porch, and my father's faint cough from the next room. I pulled on a sweater and walked downstairs. The house was quiet, but no longer hollow. At the dining table, Sarah was slicing fruit, her hair tied back neatly, a kind smile on her lips. Dad sat beside her, a newspaper in hand, but his gaze far away, resting on the small garden outside, where morning light spread over soil just beginning to wake after winter. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice still rough. "I did," I said. "It's been a long time since I slept that deeply." He smiled. "Because you finally let your mind rest." I nodded. Inside me, something warm began to rise, the feeling of someone standing on wet sand after a storm, watching the sun come up for the first time. That morning, we cleaned up the garden together. Dad sat on the wooden chair giving gentle directions while Sarah and I worked with shovels. The air carried the scent of new soil and mint we'd planted the week before. Tiny lavender sprouts had begun to push through, fragile, yet determined. "See?" Dad said, eyes bright with quiet joy. "When the earth is warm enough, the plants know how to grow on their own. People are the same. When your heart is at peace, you don't have to force it. You just grow." I laughed, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You sound like a philosopher, Dad." Just old man wisdom, he teased, but his eyes shone more vividly than I'd seen in years. When we were done, Sarah went inside to make lunch. I sat next to him, looking at my hands, covered in dirt, and felt a strange happiness. For years I'd lived with gloves on, always sterile, always in control. But now, with earth on my palms, I felt alive. By afternoon, the sky had softened to a pale hue. The light stretched gently across the quiet street, slowing everything down. I sat in the living room, opened my laptop, and checked my inbox. There it was, a new message from Samantha Harper. Emily, I heard you stayed in Chicago. Good. Sometimes we have to stay still long enough to see what we've been running from. I'm back at work now, but things feel different. I'm not afraid of making mistakes anymore. Every time I serve someone, I remember you. The person who reminded me that trust is fragile, but also saving. I'll be in Chicago next month. If you're free, I'd love to meet. I think we owe each other a cup of coffee in peace. I read the last line and smiled through tears. It wasn't an invitation for rescue anymore. It was a promise between two people who had both stepped out of fear, carrying gratitude with them. I typed my reply. Samantha, thank you for keeping your word. I'm learning to slow down too, to stop missing the moments that matter. When you come, call me. I'll buy the coffee. And if we sit in silence, that's okay. Some things are meant only to be felt. I hit send. Then a long stillness followed, as if time itself had exhaled with me. That evening, the sun faded into a quiet gold. Dad and I sat on the porch. He was wrapped in a wool blanket, a cup of ginger tea steaming in his hands. The mist from his breath mingled with the cool spring air. Dad? I said softly. I used to think saying I'm sorry was enough to fix everything. But now I realize some wounds don't need words, only time and presence. He nodded, eyes on the horizon. That's true. Forgiveness doesn't come from the mouth. It comes from the heart. When you stop blaming yourself, you've already forgiven others. I looked at him. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the cup, the sunset painting his face in shades of amber. He looked fragile, yet unshakably strong. And I suddenly understood. All this time, he too had been learning to forgive himself, for harsh words, for silence, for distance. I placed my hand over his. He closed his fingers around mine. Neither of us spoke. In that silence, my heart opened, light and unburdened, as though everything that needed saying had already been said, without a single word. Later that night, snow began to fall again, sparse, fine, threads of silver drifting down through the dark. I stood by the window, watching it coat the lavender buds outside. Even in the cold, life kept reaching upward. I thought of Samantha, the woman who restored my faith in humanity. I thought of my father, the man who showed me that love can exist quietly, without words. And I thought of myself, the woman who had gone far away, only to return home at last. I whispered a vow to the air. I'll live slowly, deeply. I won't rush through what's precious. I'll love while I still can. Speak while I still can. Forgive while I still can. A soft breeze slipped through the window crack, carrying the faint scent of young lavender. I breathed in deeply. No fear, no turmoil, only gratitude. Simple, complete. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear. I took Dad for a walk around the neighborhood. His steps were slow, but his smile never faded. We stopped by the park, where children's laughter rang through the air. Remember? He said. When you were little, you used to hate the snow. You said it was cold, lonely, and sad. I laughed. And now I think it's beautiful, because it knows when to melt. He chuckled. Then you've learned. We sat on a bench. Sunlight filtered through bare branches, scattering tiny golden patterns on the ground. I looked at him, eyes closed, face peaceful. For the first time, he didn't look burdened by worry or regret. He looked free, a man finally resting within his own peace. I whispered, "I love you, Dad." He didn't open his eyes. He simply said, "I know." A tear slipped down my cheek, but I smiled. No more words were needed. Love and forgiveness have never required explanations. That afternoon, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window. The late sunlight poured in, golden as honey. I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of this chapter. Forgiveness needs no language. It arrives when we stop running, turn around, and realize we can still love. To forgive is to choose peace over pride, staying over fleeing, love over fear. And when we do that, we are already home. I set down my pen and took a deep breath. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was still, bright, and quiet. I knew my journey wasn't over, but the regret was. And I, Emily Carter, had finally learned how to live. Truly live. In the end, Emily Carter didn't seek revenge. She chose forgiveness. Yet it was that very peace that became her strongest answer to every loss, mistake, and wound that once tried to drown her. She lived well, gently, honestly, as a quiet rebellion against her past. Because sometimes, the most beautiful revenge is no longer being hurt. And you, if you had the chance to face the one who once broke you, would you choose retaliation or peace for yourself? Leave a single line below, not to tell your story, but to remind yourself that you are still here, still breathing, and still healing.